The night was eerily silent, the kind of silence that made the world feel abandoned. The moon hung low, casting a ghostly glow over the cemetery gates. I don't know why I agreed to this. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the sheer stupidity of wanting to prove I wasn't scared. But as I stood before the rusted iron entrance, staring at the weathered tombstones beyond, I felt something shift in the air, like the whole place was holding its breath. It was supposed to be a harmless stare. My friends, Ryan and Jake, had been talking about this cemetery for weeks. It's cursed, they said. People hear whispers in the wind, see figures moving between the graves. It was an old legend, the kind you tell around a campfire to spook each other. But standing there now, with the cold creeping into my bones, it didn't feel like just a story. Come on, man, Ryan nudged me. Let's just get this over with. Jake chuckled. Yeah, unless you're scared. I scoffed and pushed open the gate. It groaned loudly, the sound echoing into the emptiness. The second I stepped inside, the air turned heavier. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled my nostrils. The graves stretched out before us in uneven rows, some with tilted headstones, others nearly swallowed by time. A few statues stood among them, angels with missing faces, figures cloaked in shadow. I pulled out my phone, the dim light barely piercing the darkness. We just need to walk to the center and back, I muttered, more to myself than them. Ryan and Jake followed, their footsteps crunching against the gravel path. I tried to ignore the feeling of being watched, but it was there, just at the edge of my senses, a presence lurking beyond the reach of my flashlight. Halfway in, we reached an old oak tree, its twisted branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. A small crumbling mausoleum sat beneath it, its entrance covered in ivy. I swallowed hard. This is it, Jake whispered. I hesitated. The air was different here, thicker, colder. A shiver crawled down my spine as I noticed something strange. The ground near the tree looked disturbed, as if someone had recently dug there. Ryan bent down, running his fingers through the dirt. Fresh, he muttered. That's weird. A sudden gust of wind howled through the cemetery, rustling the dead leaves. I turned sharply. I swore I heard something. A whisper, low and unintelligible. Jake laughed nervously. All right, we proved our point. Let's head back. But as I turned, my eyes caught movement. A shadow, shifting behind one of the tombstones. My breath hitched. There's something there, I whispered. Ryan and Jake followed my gaze. The shadow was gone, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. Then came the sound. Faint, almost imperceptible at first. A scratching noise like nails dragging against stone. It was coming from the mausoleum. Jake took a step back. Guys, I don't think we're alone. The scratching sound sent a cold wave through my body. It was faint, but steady, like something inside the mausoleum was trying to get out. I held my breath, hoping it would stop, that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But it didn't. It grew louder, closer. Ryan swallowed hard. Okay, that's enough. We should go. Jake took a step back, but his voice was unsteady. Yeah, let's not push our luck. But I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the ground. The air around us had changed. Thicker, colder, like something unseen was pressing against my skin. The wind had died completely, yet I could hear whispers weaving through the stillness. Not words exactly, but sounds that felt like they were meant to be understood. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow, shifting against the tombstones, darting from one to another. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It was moving with purpose, watching us. I grabbed Ryan's sleeve. Do you see that? He turned, but before he could answer, the scratching from the mausoleum stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was heavy, suffocating. I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. Then a deep, guttural creak came from behind us. We spun around, the iron gate. It had been wide open when we entered. Now, it was halfway closed. Jake cursed under his breath. This isn't funny. If one of you's messing around, I swear. Nobody touched it, I said quickly. My voice felt small, hollow. Ryan exhaled sharply. We need to leave, right now. But as we turned back toward the path, the wind returned, fierce and sudden, howling through the cemetery like a warning. The trees groaned, their skeletal branches swaying violently. The once distant whispers were now all around us. I could feel them against my skin, brushing against my ears, like cold breath at the nape of my neck. And then the smell hit me, rot, old wet decay, like something that had been buried for too long and was now clawing its way to the surface. It was thick in the air, sticking to my throat, making me gag. Jake covered his nose. What the hell is that? I turned my flashlight toward the mausoleum, my hand trembling. The ivy covering the entrance seemed to shift, curling as if something underneath was breathing. My stomach twisted. That wasn't possible. Ryan grabbed my arm. We're leaving. Now. But before we could take a step, something crunched behind us. A footstep. Slow, deliberate. Jake's breath hitched. Did you hear that? We turned together, every muscle in my body screaming to run. My flashlight flickered as I raised it toward the sound. The beam landed on a figure standing between the tombstones. At first I thought it was a statue. Tall, draped in something dark and tattered. But then it moved. A slow, jerking motion, as if it had forgotten how to walk. The face. There wasn't one. Just darkness where its features should have been. The whispers grew frantic, louder, circling us. The wind lashed at my face. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. Then the figure raised its hand and pointed. At me. The moment the figure pointed at me, my entire body locked up. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, it felt like the world had stopped. The whispers, the wind, even the distant creaking of the cemetery gate, all of it faded into a heavy, suffocating silence. The only thing I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat, wild and erratic. Jake grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. Dude, we have to go. Now. I couldn't move. My flashlight trembled in my grip, the beam flickering as if the battery was dying. The figure didn't come closer, but the darkness around it seemed to shift, like shadows, curling and twisting unnaturally. It wasn't human, it couldn't be. Ryan's voice was sharp, urgent. Come on, man, move. Then the whispers surged back, but this time they weren't just noises. They were words, faint, broken, but clear enough to freeze my blood. You shouldn't be here. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing right behind me. But there was nothing, just rows of crooked tombstones stretching into the darkness. The wind picked up again, more violent than before, rattling the branches of the old oak tree. The ivy-covered mausoleum groaned, as if something inside was shifting. I heard the scratching again, but now it was accompanied by something far worse, breathing, heavy, ragged breathing coming from the other side of the stone door. Jake stumbled backward. Screw this! I'm out of here! He turned and bolted down the path. Ryan hesitated for only a second before grabbing my wrist and dragging me along. Move, damn it! I forced my legs to work, my heart slamming against my ribs as we sprinted toward the gate. The path felt longer than before, stretching endlessly ahead of us. The shadows seemed to pulse, creeping closer, shifting unnaturally along the graves. The whispers turned to wails, low, mournful cries that rose into ear-piercing shrieks. Then I made the mistake of looking back. The figure was gone, but something else had taken its place. A mass of darkness, writhing like living smoke, surged between the tombstones, moving fast, too fast. The cemetery itself felt like it was warping, twisting around us as if it didn't want to let us leave. Jake was almost at the gate when he suddenly stopped. What the? Ryan and I skidded to a halt behind him. My stomach lurched. The gate was closed. Number, not just closed. Locked. The rusted chain that had been hanging loose before was now wound tightly around the bars. The heavy padlock snapped shut. Jake yanked at it desperately. No, 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 this wasn't here before. I turned back toward the cemetery, my breathing ragged. The dark mass had stopped moving. It loomed just beyond the nearest row of graves, shifting and pulsing like it was waiting for something. Then, from deep within it, a voice slithered out, low, guttural, ancient. Stay. A blast of icy air slammed into us, knocking me off my feet. I hit the ground hard, my flashlight spinning out of my hand. The moment the light left me, the darkness pressed closer, thick and suffocating. My fingers scrambled against the dirt as I tried to crawl backward, away from whatever was coming. Ryan cursed and pounded against the gate. Help! Somebody help us! His voice barely carried beyond the cemetery walls. Jake kept yanking at the chain, his hands shaking. It won't budge. I tried to reach for my flashlight, but before I could grab it, a hand, cold, bony, and covered in something wet, closed around my ankle. I screamed. The hand around my ankle tightened, ice-cold fingers digging into my skin with an unnatural strength. I kicked wildly, my foot slamming against something solid but giving no resistance, like hitting a corpse that had been buried for far too long. A raspy breath, slow and deliberate, curled against my leg, sending a wave of nausea through me. Help! My voice cracked as I clawed at the ground, trying to pull myself away. The flashlight lay just out of reach, flickering weakly. Shadows twisted around it as if something unseen was trying to snuff out the last bit of light. Ryan turned, his face pale with terror. He lunged forward, grabbed my arm, and yanked hard. Hold on! Jake let out a strangled gasp. Behind you! Ryan barely had time to react before something huge. And on Dara Shandis, Sisvaram rose from the shifting darkness behind him. It wasn't the shadowy figure anymore. It was something much worse, something that had been waiting, watching. And now? It had us. A towering shape, its form barely human, loomed over Ryan. Its body was wrapped in tattered burial cloths, soaked with dirt and decay. Hollow eye sockets. Black and endless attire stared out from a skull-like face. Its jaw hung slack, as if it had been dislocated, and from deep inside its throat came a low, guttural moan. Not of pain, but of hunger. Ryan froze, his grip on my arm going limp. His eyes were locked onto the thing in front of him. His lips parted in silent horror. The creature's hand, if you could call it that, rose slowly, skeletal fingers stretching toward him. The air around us thickened, pressing against my chest like a suffocating weight. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something. Anything. But my body refused to obey. Then a whisper, different from the others, brushed against my ear. The light. For a split second, I didn't understand. Then my eyes snapped to the flashlight, still flickering weakly in the dirt. My heart pounded as I stretched my arm forward, my fingers barely grazing the cold metal. Ryan let out a strangled cry as the creature's fingers brushed his shoulder. Now, with the last bit of strength I had left, I grabbed the flashlight and turned it directly toward the thing. The beam flared, unnaturally bright, flooding the graveyard with a blinding white glow. The reaction was immediate. The creature shrieked. A sound so inhuman, so deafening, that my skull felt like it would split open. It reeled back, its hollow eyes burning with agony. The dark mist around it writhed violently, as if caught in a storm of light. The whispering voices turned into agonized wails, screeching through the cemetery. Jake wasted no time. He grabbed a rock and saw it smashed it against the rusted padlock. It didn't break, but it loosened. Again, Ryan shouted, snapping out of his daze. He snatched the rock from Jake and slammed it down with all his strength. Crack! The chain snapped. The gate creaked open just as the monstrous figure lunged forward. Its mouth stretching wide, too wide, like a gaping abyss, ready to swallow us whole. We didn't hesitate. We ran. The wind howled behind us, carrying the creature's furious screech as we sprinted out of the cemetery and onto the deserted road. The second we crossed the threshold, the heavy air around us lifted. The suffocating presence vanished. The whispers ceased. We didn't stop running until we reached the old gas station at the edge of town. Only then did we dare to look back. The cemetery stood silent beneath the moonlit sky, the gate swaying slightly in the wind. The darkness that had nearly consumed us was gone, but in its place, an eerie stillness remained, as if it was waiting for the next fool to step inside.